This has always been a highly problematic story, and the more I think about it, the more problems I see. It says early on, God tested Abraham. And as we look at the Bible, there is an inconsistent attitude to tests and trials. So God is said to test not only Abraham here, but in many other places. He tests the children of Israel. Yet the people themselves are banned from testing God. And you can find many passages, such as Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 16, bans the testing of God. Having said that, there are some people who test God and get away with it. And one of the principal examples I think of is Gideon, who offers several tests to see whether the call that he's receiving from the Lord is something that he ought to follow. And indeed, 1 John chapter 4, towards the end of the Bible, you have a suggestion to test the spirits. Then I ask the question, well, why does God need to test anything or anyone? And this was the point of reading Psalm 139 before. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. We believe that the Lord knows his creations far more deeply than we know ourselves. Why would God need to find anything out about us? And then what is the test actually, and how did God set it up? If I were to ask the question, does God lie? What would you answer? God does not lie. If I ask you, does God change his mind? What do you answer? No, God does not change his mind either. So what happens here? Did he lie? Did he change his mind? Or was there something else going on? It's a big problem. And then there's the question of child sacrifice. As we read elsewhere in the Bible, I've got Leviticus 18, I've got Deuteronomy 18. There are a number of places where the Lord commands that child sacrifice ought not to be carried out. And yet here he appears to ask for it. Why would God ask for something that he does not require? So there's a couple of things that I reflect on about this passage. And I think really there's two things that are going on here, two things that I really want to learn. First of all, I see here God being heard by Abraham in Abraham's language. So Abraham comes from a culture where sacrifice and child sacrifice is a common occurrence, a common expectation. And so when Abraham hears the Lord speak, this is what he hears. He hears the need to sacrifice his son Isaac. The Lord meets us in our own cultural expectations and the way that we can hear truths. And he allows that appearance because it has currency for us. We understand it in a way that we don't understand deeper truths. I saw a program many years ago now talking about circumcision, and it made mention of the fact that the Jewish understanding looks to this story as a move from one form of sacrifice to another. This is the point at which the Jews learned that the ancient customs were no longer appropriate. And here is the point where they moved to the practice of circumcision. And I found that an interesting way to look at it. But of course it speaks of a bigger problem too, because as Christians we see then beyond that the story of the crucifixion and the Lord's seeming requirement of the death of a person. The term is penal substitutionary atonement. The idea that the Lord died for our sins. And that in itself is a whole big problem. The Lord never requires such things. He does not require a death. He does not require a sacrifice to appease his sense of righteousness or justice. It's us. We get fascinated with these ideas. God, we are told, is infinite love. And everything about New Church teaching falls out of that one recognition. So whilst God does not require a sacrifice, God never did require a sacrifice. This was Abraham hearing the Lord speaking in a particular way, and Abraham's mind is changed through the process of this event. Still, the story says something deeper to us as well. And this is the second thing that we need to remember about this, and indeed any story from the Bible. There's something deeper here that we can actually learn that is actually useful. And it represents something that does need to be given up. There is something of relevance in this idea of a sacrifice. And if we think about what I mentioned before about the Jews moving from child sacrifice to circumcision, we realize about circumcision also, what's the important thing? Is it the circumcision of a part of the body? No, it's not. It's the circumcision of the heart and the mind, which is so very important. That's the core of the lesson that we need to learn. Does anybody know the term, the Jewish term for the burnt offering? The Holocaust.
Really?
Yes. Now, I remember learning that for the first time. Now, of course, we hear that word and we go back in our mind and we think of World War II and everything that took place to the Jewish people at that time, which they called the Holocaust. A Holocaust is an offering to the Lord. It is to dedicate something to the Lord. And so in using that term, the Jews looked at the way that those people who died in those most atrocious of circumstances were dedicated to the Lord. That's what the burnt offering is. And so whatever it is Isaac represents is to be dedicated to the Lord in a way that we give it up. It's no longer ours. It's giving something up that we cling to, but we recognize the Lord owns it, not us. And so what is it that Isaac represents? Well, there's two things I'll refer to. The first is in Abraham's mind. Isaac represents a family. He represents a promise. Isaac was born when Abraham and Sarah were very old, and he is the means by which they generate this great people that they've already been promised that will fill the land. And so Abraham, in following through with this, what's going on here? What's important is the dedication that we have to the Lord, not the reward that we gain from the dedication. So Isaac, in a sense, is the reward that's been offered. The family, the filling the earth, is the reward that Abraham has been offered. But God's question is really, which is more important? Is it the getting of the reward, or is it the dedication itself? And Abraham, in following through, is saying it's the dedication that's more important. And therefore the reward is re-established and made all the more real. But then also, in terms of the spiritual meaning we see in the text, if you remember what we've spoken about in previous weeks, we talked about Ishmael last month and how Ishmael represents the early teenage rational, if you like. Isaac represents the mature rational mind. And I would suggest what I see here in the story is the appearance that a dedication to the Lord requires us to give up our ability to think. Does dedication to the Lord require us to give up our rational powers? And I would suggest no, it doesn't. Although that is the appearance. And many people fall there. They think that to give dedication to God, we need to switch your mind off. No, I no longer think, I just believe what I'm told. But that's not what we believe is the right way. God has given us a mind to use. And it's to dedicate the use of that mind to the Lord, to serve His purposes in the world, which is essentially to love one another, to be of use, to be of service, to see that goodness grows and evil is put aside. This is what the mind is for. And this is what we are asked to reclaim. So I'm going to ask you today just to consider, what is it that makes a mind dedicated to God? Because that's the Isaac that we are handed back. I'll just finish by saying, I want you to remember that God requires nothing to satisfy his own desires. Nothing of us. He doesn't require the death of a child. He doesn't even require the death of a self-centered ego, or what we term the proprium. But if we are to enter fully into love, then sacrificial love is something that we must engender within our own lives. There's no other way. You cannot claim love from others and give nothing back. Love requires love. It's a two-way process. We all understand this. But it's not because of the nature of God. It's because of what we need to establish in our own lives.